Hello everyone, it's Silver. This is Sulfur. So Sulfur is an FPS roguelite that is kinda heavily based around slowly gathering resources for one really good run. But first off, how it actually looks, because it looks pretty cool. It looks and sounds actually. It's got this sort of flat shaded look to it. Everything is very heavily sort of earth toned, or at least a lot of things are, and the things that aren't stand out really vividly because they're not. But I would call the art style sort of cartoon-esque in terms of how the characters and enemies and things look. They're all kind of cute and a little bit sort of makes you feel bad for killing them, but there's also a lot of less pleasant stuff that you'll encounter later on. And in fact, there's also this really heavy undercurrent of like Lovecraftian cosmic horror that's happening in the background of the sort of, I guess you could call it story, the narrative that's happening. And those sequences where more of that sort of awful stuff is shown, they're a lot more nightmarish and sort of garishly colorful and stuff as a way to denote that you have entered into like nightmare territory and things are going to get weird. But one thing I didn't expect was the soundtrack. The soundtrack to this game is, I would call it kind of like chill hop a little bit. It's kind of like that. It's like a relaxed, chill, kind of vaguely hip-hop adjacent kind of sound. So it's not like a specific genre, I don't think, because it kind of takes elements from multiple different things, but it plays them all out in a very chill fashion. Even in the more action-y tracks that are going to happen, like during boss fights, for instance, there's still a lot of kind of zen to the soundtrack, which is interesting. It's a neat way to do things, and I think it actually works out in the game's favor because it tends to create this kind of zen focus experience, and that's basically what you need to actually survive in this game, because it's really, really hard. So the basic gameplay loop is that you will start out at a church, and this church has some NPCs that act as vendors and just kind of help you out in general, but you've got to have money to actually purchase anything, and there will be a collections box that you can loot at the beginning of each run that will give you some money. I'm not entirely sure how it decides how much money is in there. I think it's based on what you were holding at the last time you died, like the sort of inventory that you had, because I've noticed that it doesn't seem to exclusively be about getting farther, it's more about what you've actually got in your possession. But this money won't actually be very much, no matter what you had in your possession. It's a small fraction of what it was all actually worth. And because of this, you'll have to kill a lot of enemies to get a lot of money, and also just pick up random garbage and sell it to NPCs, because as you're going through a run, you'll find various shops. To actually start a run away from the church, you will pick the location that you want to go to. When you first start the game, you only have one, but as you explore and beat bosses and stuff, you'll unlock more. So you don't have to start from the beginning first area every single time. You can go to any of the areas you've unlocked so far. But the first area is the caves, and the caves is where you're going to spend a lot of time getting used to how the game works, because like I said, it's a very difficult game, and it's got very exacting mechanics. Like, it expects you to be really, really frugal with your resources and good at using environmental aspects in combat and things like that, because it really starves you of resources, like, very heavily. But once you choose the area you want to go to, you can enter it, and that will be your run. Your run will be complete once you've beaten that area, and then you'll return to the church in between areas. And one area, like the caves, is several levels long, usually about anywhere from like 5 to 7-ish levels long, depending on the area. And the final bit will always end with a boss, and then about halfway through each one will be an altar. And this is one of the game's more interesting ideas. You're kind of meant to gather resources across multiple smaller runs, keep going back to the church and storing stuff away and buying upgrades and all that good stuff, and then eventually have a whole bunch of stuff ready for a much more sort of concerted try at the boss, where you'll try to push all the way to the end of the area. And this is all facilitated by your amulet. You have an amulet that can take you back home at any time, so you can just abandon the run right there while you're still alive and keep everything in your inventory and go back to the church. But if you do this, it also expends the charge from the amulet, and the only way to charge it back up is to make it to that room with the altar in it about halfway through a run. So once you do return early from a run, you won't be able to do it again until you make it at least halfway through the next area. Now, this is an FPS. You're not really using melee weapons for the most part. You're using guns, like projectile weapons pretty much the whole way through. And to that end, there are a lot of different guns in this game. You do have a melee strike that you can use, and you are encouraged to use it to save ammo, but it's not really your main weapon in any way. It's not strong enough to be the primary that you go through the dungeon with necessarily, but it does make you run faster, which is useful. If you hold the melee button down, you'll put your hand on it, and then as soon as you release the button, you'll draw it and attack, but while your hand is on it, you move faster than moving in any other way. But the main draw, the guns, the weapons of the game, are actually one of the most interesting parts, because the aesthetic and sort of idea they've used for a lot of these weapons seems to be similar to real-life weapons, but not quite. Like, they're recognizably weapons that you would expect to see, except there are a couple of odd things about them, and pretty much none of them are clearly based on one particular realistic gun. Usually they're kind of just odd. Like, for instance, a handgun that uses 5.56 ammo in order to get some more punch out of a handgun, which of course doesn't really work in real life, but it does work here. And I think that's the sort of primary idea that all these weapons are supposed to work off of. The idea that they're like almost realistic, but not quite. And there are some really outlandish ones that you'll find later on too. Like, there's a sort of laser revolver that's a lot of fun to use. There's also a shotgun that loads a whole bunch of shells into itself at once and fires them all at the same time. And there's even an anti-material SMG, if you can believe that. It's a 50 cal SMG, and it fires very slowly, and its iron sights are sort of on the side of the weapon, like you're using a rocket launcher or something, but it is extremely effective. It's actually one of the most powerful weapons I've found so far. There are several different ammo types that you'll want to try and be stocked up on. That way, if you drop a weapon, you know you have at least some ammo for it. But that is very difficult in this game, because this game doesn't drop stuff very often for you, including ammunition. In fact, it's easy to go through an area using a lot more ammunition than you're able to find. This will lead to moments where you need to rely on merchants that you happen across, because pretty much every merchant, no matter what else they sell, also sells some ammo boxes, usually 1 or 2 ammo boxes of every type. So you're going to be encouraged to scrounge a lot in this game, and as you're going through the levels, you'll fight various enemies in differently laid out rooms that are often quite dark, and once you get into the later areas of the game, you'll be in things like a sort of a cityscape with buildings and stuff that obviously makes things a bit more complicated than just an open cave, but they all have similar ideas of a lot of verticality, some platforming involved in some of the arenas to get through them or to get to advantageous areas, and there's often some extra features and stuff that you can take advantage of, like mushrooms that you can pick for healing, or explosive barrels you can shoot, and things like that. And you'll also be looking for kind of secret-ish things, like destructible items that will very rarely, sometimes, have loot in them, as well as various bits that you can get for food. You don't need to eat in the sense that there's a hunger system or anything, but you do need to eat to heal yourself. Food is pretty much the best way, aside from the incredibly rare healing potion, to actually heal yourself. You can carry 2 weapons at a time, switch between them very easily, and also you have 3 quick item slots where you can put things like grenades. You've also got a pretty expansive grid-based inventory that's really nice to use. It feels a lot like a stalker inventory, I think might be one of the bigger examples, and it just works fine. It's a good inventory. You can fit as much stuff as you can cram into it, and you will often want to do so because, of course, you need to keep lots of food and ammo on you in order to actually be able to make it very far. You will be in combat most of the game. I have a feeling that maybe sometimes the idea is you don't have to kill every enemy you come across, because of course you are very starved for resources, so you might not be able to do that easily. But I'm not sure how well that works in practice, because the levels are often pretty narrow and difficult to run around in away from stuff. You can't really hide anywhere or anything. They're a straight line with some more complex rooms, and this means that if you're trying to run through enemies and not kill them, you're gonna have a really rough time, because they're gonna be getting tons and tons of free hits in on you as you try to run past them in these really narrow environments. When you are back at the church, you can use a large storage chest that has an even bigger inventory that you can store all sorts of crap in. You can even store individual ammo types and money in there, but whenever you die, you lose everything that was on your body at that time. So all of your equipped gear, your weapons, your money, your ammo, everything, it goes down the drain. So you do want to occasionally return to the church and store some stuff. Although this is a difficult balance to strike, because if you store too much, then you won't have enough when you go back, and you'll just die anyway and end up back at the church. And overall, I think that might be kind of my problem with the game. I've enjoyed my time more than not, and I think it's actually a really solid roguelite shooter that's got a lot of potential. But it does kind of annoy me how the difficulty of this game gets in the way of its own mechanics a little bit. Like, it is so absurdly starving you of resources, and it's so difficult that it actually kind of goes back on some of the things it's trying to do in order to manufacture this difficulty for you. To the point that, like, for instance, it has a ton of really creative weapons that are all really fun to use and really interesting to get your hands on, but the game almost never drops them, like ever. So you'll never really see them. And what's the point of having all of those shiny weapons if you can't actually use any of them because the game never gives them to you? If you do get lucky and get dropped a weapon, there's no guarantee that you'll even have any ammo for it. And in fact, you probably won't. If it's not 9mm, you probably don't have it because the game drops so little ammo that you won't really be able to create a stockpile of ammo very easily. There's just not enough to go around to do that. I think it's kind of weird how some of the game works. I like the fact that the game has a pretty detailed cooking system where you can combine all sorts of different stuff together just to see what happens. It won't let you waste ingredients. If you have an invalid recipe, then the button just won't work. You can't combine them. But you can slap together all sorts of stuff without a recipe and still get a valid combination if you are lucky or know what you're doing or just have a good guess. I really like this system, but I think there's more to it that the game isn't really allowing you to interface with very well. For one, there is no recipe list, so once you successfully make something, it's not noted down anywhere, you just have to memorize them all. But also, I think there's an entire mechanic involving the organs of enemies that the game just doesn't explain or tell you how to interact with at all. Because it acts as if enemy organs are a really valuable thing for you to get, but so far I don't know what to do with them aside from sell them, and they're not worth that much, to the point that it's really worth all the effort to get them, because you have to use guns to get organs. If you use your sword, they don't drop, or they drop damage and they don't do anything. So whatever it is that they do is apparently really worthwhile to be worth spending all these resources to get, but I don't know what they're actually for, and the game won't tell you. I found a few recipes with them, but most of it has been just like kind of early tier food and stuff, so that obviously isn't the big use that they apparently have that makes them so valuable. So I don't know exactly what the game expects from me in that regard, but it seems to think these are a really valuable resource and I should be trying to get them at all times, but it also refuses to tell me why I would want to do that. I think in order for this game to work long term, it's going to need a bit of a rebalancing in terms of its resource scarcity. Right now, everything is so obscenely rare that even the slightest item drop is like a huge event because you just don't get anything. And most of my runs in this game have ended not because I messed up in some identifiable way and got hit by a big attack that I now know how to dodge or whatever. No, it was just because I ran out of resources and ran out of steam. I just ran out of ammo, no healing, no guns, nothing. To make the resource scarcity even worse, all of your gear has durability, and as you're using your guns going through the dungeon, they'll just get more and more broken until eventually they'll stop working altogether. And if you haven't gotten amazingly lucky and found a repair kit or a new gun, then you're just kind of screwed. There's nothing you can really do about it. So I think Sulfur personally is something that everyone that enjoys roguelite should keep an eye on, because it's got an amazing soundtrack and a really cool aesthetic and some really fun gameplay with a lot of creative guns. However, its current difficulty state, which is luckily something that can be changed and iterated by the developer rather than sort of a huge design flaw that can't be fixed or something, its difficulty is just so absurdly high that it actually kind of goes back on its own positive points. It's a game with a ton of tactical variety and really fun stuff to give and show the player that refuses to actually give or show any of it to them. But I also have a feeling that the more you play the game, the more this is going to open up, and you start to get used to its insanely unfair difficulty, and you start to be able to actually beat areas like I have been able to just a couple of times so far. Then it does open up and feel better, but to me it still feels as if there's something about the balance that isn't just me being bad, but is rather that it's like overly difficult for the sake of being difficult without realizing how this negatively affects the rest of the game and its content and its high points. So yeah, that is Sulfur. I would say definitely keep an eye on this one. It has a lot of high points, and it's also just a really good time, even though it's currently very frustrating. So even in its state right now, I would say it's still worth a look. And hopefully that will get maybe smoothed out a little bit as people learn more about the game, or indeed as the developer decides to alter the balance, whatever it is they decide to do. I hope that it sees the success that it deserves, because there's clearly a lot of talent behind this one. So I will link you in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Sulfur if you guys wish to check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.